I had just left my parish church to return to University of Chicago for my PhD program, and this would be 1962. And I was sitting at my desk one morning preparing for the German exam, and I got a call from a fellow Methodist minister saying, you want to go to Albany? Dr. King needs us there. I said, well, gee, I didn't know they had problems like that in New York. I hadn't heard of Albany, Georgia. Well, I soon found out about Albany, Georgia. Dr. King had, Albany's a complicated story, but he had gotten involved in there kind of against his will and was doing the best he could in a movement he didn't organize or plan. And he'd really run out of anything to do there. He'd been working there for almost a year. And everybody who could be arrested had been arrested. They didn't have any more money for bail. And the local community had taken it about as far as he could. And so I think, I'm not sure whose idea it was, probably Jim Bevel's, that...
the Reverend James Bevel,
yeah.
who was with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Yeah, I'm not sure he was with them yet, because a lot of the good and crazy ideas came from him. Somebody suggested, well, why don't we invite some people from the North to come? And so Dr. King had contacts. He had done voter registration drives, for example, in Chicago. He had contacts in Chicago and New York and I guess that was it. Oh, and New Haven. And he sent out word that he needed help and could some ministers or lay people and priests and rabbis come to Albany at such and such a date. It was about a week later. And so I was invited because I had been involved in the community organization movement and the schools issue and so forth. So about 70 of us from the three cities agreed to go. And we took buses down, and we left at dinner time, which is only important because the next morning, which was breakfast time, we just crossed into Kentucky, Paducah, I believe. And we stopped at a restaurant to get some breakfast, and they, of course, would not serve us because we were an integrated group. And we said, well, I'm sorry, but we need breakfast, and you're in the, we weren't about to leave. And so finally they got a hold of the manager and the owner and so forth, and they set us up in a private dining room, and we got breakfast there.
Black and white were eating together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we agreed we don't need to stop at any more restaurants. And so we would pull into a supermarket, and we'd go in and get bread and cold cuts and so forth, which was interesting because within a minute or two, police cars would descend upon us. See, this was just 1 year after the Freedom Riders. And the fact that we were going was fairly well known because part of our plan was to contact local ministers and meet with them and have a fraternal discussion. So we had a lot of attention. As we got closer and closer to Albany, we were met at county lines by the county sheriff who would escort us across the county. And we got to Albany in time to spend the night in African American homes. When I showed pictures of the trip to my classes, I'd ask them, how could you tell that this was an African American neighborhood? And they would say, well, because the housing was run down. I said, no, there's rundown white housing. Because there's a dog in the middle of the street. No, there's dogs in the middle of the street elsewhere. Because it's a dirt street. I mean, Albany, in the same block, would be paved, and then all of a sudden, dirt. Paved, white neighborhood, dirt, black neighborhood.
And all paying taxes.
All paying taxes. Met some very charismatic people at an orientation. I don't know whether it was our first night there or the second. Charles Sherrard, Bernice Johnson Regan, Cordell Regan. If you ever look up charisma in a dictionary, they got their pictures next to that. I mean, these are really powerful people. We were invited to do what the Albany movement had done in their biggest demonstration at Christmas time the year before. They went and prayed for racial justice on the sidewalk in front of City Hall. And that got them arrested, and it got us arrested. 40 out of our 70 chose to be arrested. And so we were arrested for blocking a sidewalk. We were careful not to do that, of course. For disturbing the peace, well, there were people across the street who were throwing stuff at us and calling us nasty names, but we weren't disturbing the peace. And if we weren't doing either one of those two things, we weren't doing the third thing, disobeying an officer because he had no reason to arrest us. This was one of the characteristics of the South at this time. They would use well-meaning laws to repress, suppress freedom of speech or assembly, or to punish civil rights demonstrators. And so, I mean, there's nothing wrong with disturbing the peace laws or blocking the sidewalk laws, but they were used inappropriately.
What was the overarching call that Dr. King had sent out for these preachers to come? What did he specifically want you all to do? To be a presence? Because I'm assuming were most of them white who came? I know it, but there were some.
Mostly white, not exclusively. It was to make a faith interracial witness in Albany. I don't know that he explicitly said the possibility of arrest, but we weren't stupid. We knew that might take place. So I first met Dr. King when he came to visit me in jail, where I was by his invitation. About 15 of us, they divide us up into 4 different jails. And I was with a group of about 15 that was in a cement block building out in the middle of the country that was had been for chain gang. And we were out there pretty much by ourselves. Other jails where some of us were got shot at, but we didn't. But what they did do, now, I don't know that you ever read this anyplace, but one of the traditions of the nonviolent movement was that you fast your first 24 hours in jail. And I don't know whether that's to remind you of your spiritual purpose or to make the jail food taste better, but that's what we did the first 24 hours. But then our first morning in jail, we woke up and here's this powerful odor of bacon and eggs and biscuits being fixed in the adjacent kitchen to this dormitory kind of thing. Well, we talked about it and decided the thing to do was we went in and sat down, prayed, got up and left without eating. and decided in the process not to continue our fast as long as we were in jail. One of us, Lutheran ministers, I recall, had at that time what I have now. I have to snack every couple hours. He needed some food for his blood sugar, and so he stayed in the cafeteria, the lunchroom next to the dormitory, and he was on national television as the guy who broke the fast. He just needed some food.
Stay healthy.
Yeah.
Did you have? I know that at some point were you afraid? Were you fearful? What was going on inside your head and your heart?
Well, we eventually, when Dr. King visited us, he said three things. One was this was a great success. It's front page news all across the country, and literally every paper I saw had a picture of us and praying in front of the city hall, because remember, this is 1962, and for an interracial group of ministers from the North, ministers, priests, and rabbis, to be praying in front of a jail in Albany, Georgia, was just unheard of. I mean, ministers in those days didn't go to jail unless you belonged to some whacked out organization like CORE or SNCC or something. But, these were, mainstream people. He also said it's a mistake to ever imprison committed men, because they have time to plan the next stage of the revolution. And thirdly, he said, and here's the zinger, we'd like some of you to stay in for a few days to keep the story going. Those of you who need to bail out, do so, but we'd like some of you to stay in. Well, it was mostly my group who, from the blockhouse out in the country, that decided to stay in. And remember, we had promised to fast as long as we stayed in jail. So we backed into what amounted to as a 6 or 7 day fast. But we were moved back to the Dougherty County Jail across from the city hall where we had knelt to pray. And that got us a little nervous, because we were in then with regular inmates. And we were nervous enough that we had a 24-hour watch going so that nothing happened to us at nighttime. But the reason we thought that way was because some people had been beaten in the jail. Albany was famous as the police chief was Laurie Pritchett, and he had, quote unquote, the first nonviolent police force in the South, because the police force didn't beat people up, they just arrested them and put them in jail, and then they had other people go in and beat them up.
Inmates.
So we were worried about other inmates, but it didn't happen. And after 6 or 7 days, we bailed out. There's one more part of this story, I'll tell you, and that is, we thought we were done with it. I went back to Chicago and started spending a couple of nights a week speaking about Albany and trying to raise money for our bail funds and so forth. Lo and behold, comes January, we get a letter from the city of Albany wanting us to appear for trial. And we call around, and it turns out they picked one person from Chicago, Anderson, I'm an A, one person from New York, who also was high in the alphabet, and one person from New Haven, which created a situation where the three of us had to travel separately to Albany if we were going to go. They didn't expect us to go. We decided we would go, of course, and it became common knowledge when I started calling Methodist ministers in Albany, because they didn't meet with us the first time we were there. Would they meet with me now? And it was no, but the word got around, and first thing I know, I've got a call from the judge who will hear this case, well, it's actually from a member of his congregation explaining to me, Reverend Anderson, Judge so-and-so is a good Methodist layman, and he would be so embarrassed to have to try a Methodist minister in his court. Couldn't I please reconsider and not come? And I said, well, are you dropping the charges? Oh, no, we're not doing that, but you could just use your bail money to pay a fine, and that would be it. And I said, I'll see you in court. That was, I had a wonderful, my schedule flying to Albany worked out so I had a day in Atlanta where my host was Andy Young. And Andy showed me around the Southern Christian Leadership Conference offices. He took me to lunch where Daddy King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s father, was organizing a, what do we call it, a bread boycott in Atlanta with all the black ministers of the city, or many of them. And then I took a plane that had no seats in it, had some benches, to Atlanta to Albany. There was one other person on the plane. He was a court reporter that we were flying into Albany so we would have a transcript so we could appeal the verdict, which got to be funny in the courtroom. At the first recess in the trial, the stenographer was mobbed by the judge, the local lawyer, the city attorney. So they'd never seen a steno machine, and they wanted to see how it worked and so forth. Anyway, one more part of the Albany story. My lawyer was C.B. King. C.B. was the he was an Albany native. He was he went to Fisk. Then he went to Wayne State Law School and got a law degree and chose to return to Albany, where he was the only African-American lawyer south of Atlanta, the only one that would defend African-Americans or take civil rights cases and so forth. And so I got to know C.B. King, but he had an office that was about the size probably of the bathroom in my house or yours. I mean, it was just little. It was not a well-paying practice, and he was reviled and had actually gotten beaten one time. He was one of the people that was beaten in jail as he had tried to visit a client to see how they were doing. But I took a civil rights trip this past summer. I went to Selma and Birmingham and Montgomery and Albany. And I get to Albany, and I know by my research that there's now a federal courthouse, the C.B. King Federal Courthouse. And we turn the corner, and there it is. It takes up the whole block. It's the biggest building in town, named for this guy who had been reviled.
No relation to Dr. King.
No relation, no. But he had been the first guy to run for Congress, first black guy to run for Congress since Reconstruction. He was the first African American to run for governor in Georgia. Didn't win either one, but did win a lot of civil rights cases.
He won your case? Did he win your case?
No. I think they finally just settled for, I don't know whether it was dropped or whether we just used the bail money to pay the fine or what happened. It probably wasn't worth his time. But he was the first, he died in '88, and shortly before his death, he was the first recipient of the Martin Luther King Jr. Humanitarian Award, awarded by the vote of the Georgia legislature. He was the first recipient of that reward, so he did end up very
So
well.
he got some reward on
Yeah.
this side for all of those years.
Yeah.